It kind of feels like everybody is saying, go forward, conquer, go break something. And then we're going to figure things out once something breaks. To your point, Dara, I think the problem is that people are going to get harmed when that thing breaks.
Last year, Jason and I decided to close out the Alloy Labs annual member meeting with a live recording of Hot Takes, the session where the food is hot wings, the format is loose, and the goal is to say out loud the things that usually get edited out. This year, we skipped the wings and got right to the hot takes. It got a little uncomfortable in the best way. The day before, we had a session on what we call the debt versus equity mindset, and the core provocation was this. Most bankers have a debt mindset only. Protect the downside, don't lose, be happy getting your principal back with your contractual interest on top. But as South State Bank's Chris Nichols points out, the economics run in both directions. Banks too often take on equity-level risk, a startup loan, a construction deal, while only pricing in debt returns. Then on the other side, when it comes to strategy and product and new initiatives, they don't think big enough and actually capture the upside. They're comfortable with low, mid-single-digit return in a world where some banks are producing mid-double digits. The framing was still hanging in the air the next day when Jason sat down for Hot Takes with Kiah Haslett, longtime bank reporter, now at FinTech Takes, Dara Tarkowski, who chairs the Tech Innovations and Financial Regulation practice at Mutt Schellis, and Rick Geloff, CIO at Bank of North Dakota, who's actually building some of what everyone else is still talking about. Kiah laid out what she called a strategically correct but morally bankrupt observation. In a lighter touch regulatory environment, the prisoner's dilemma rewards whoever moves first. Dara pushed back, not on the logic, but on the assumption that the rules have actually changed. Grand jury subpoenas were flying last year. The statutes are still there, and Rick brought it all back to earth. How do you actually quantify the risk, put a number on it, and bring your board along? What ties it all together is a question the debt mindset doesn't even know how to ask. What's the cost of not acting? Waiting for clarity that isn't coming is also a choice, and it also has a return, just not the kind you want. So what you're about to hear is how bankers actually work something out when they're not performing certainty. That's exactly why we do this. Let's get into it.
All right, well, welcome to the last session. We're going to bring this to a fiery close. For those who were here last year, Kiah, Alex Johnson, Chris Nichols, and I actually did have the hot wings for the hot takes. The concept of you do not regularly listen to Breaking Banks is Alex and I kind of started this as a joke during COVID because I love hot wings. And I'm like, wouldn't it be kind of funny if we did like that interview show on the Now We Feast and like eat the hot wings and stuff, and we just give her like our hottest takes on the industry. And Alex had this really cool perspective on it where he goes, yeah, like we could workshop ideas. We don't actually have it all figured out. We just kind of go back and forth on the hot take. And, you know, it almost becomes the Seinfeld, the show about nothing. It's like, we don't have the conclusions or the answers, but boy, we're going to get fiery as we talk about that. So this is version 2. It will be live on Breaking Banks. And if you want to ask questions, you're free to ask questions. You do not have to introduce yourselves to your compliance departments. Will not be upset. You will not be on camera. You will not be named, but you can jump in. And we're going to do a little bit of a retro on some of the things we predicted last year. And when it was Kiah, Chris, Alex, and I, we talked about the regulatory reset and part of this framing that who actually wins in a world that is now lighter regulatory touch. Because it's something that, let's face it, if you look at ABA and ICBA, they've been advocating for this for a long time. And I had a counterpoint said, I don't think it's actually the regulated institutions that are going to benefit. I think it's going to be those who were either in the regulatory gray area or unregulated. Actually, they get a free pass to run faster. And let me start this by saying I was using Claude to do some prep for this based on our early conversations, and not to call someone out, Kiah Haslett, but Claude's take on some of Kiah's perspectives said, strategically correct and morally bankrupt. So Kiah, with that, we're going to talk about why Kiah is morally bankrupt. This will probably be the last time she wants to appear. So the opening where we went with this, and we're going to start, Kiah, on your perspective here, is I tied it to the world where if you have actors who are already slightly outside of the regulatory purview, feel like they can run faster and looser than ever before, if we set up a prisoner's dilemma here, where if you don't remember all of your philosophical paradigms, is the person who sells out the others faster the winning strategy, right? That is the prisoner's dilemma. If I rat on the others first, that's the winning strategy, is to be the first rat. If I believe someone else is going to rat, and to which Kiah said.
So thank you for that setup. And I want to make it really clear, these are my observations about the world and not my personal philosophy of how I interact with the world. But that, and I hear over and over you guys talk about doing the right thing, doing the legal thing, even in this regulatory recalibration world. And it seems like everyone is like kind of scared of going to jail. Like, I never worry about going to jail, but it seems like you guys are kind of worried about going to jail. and it comes up a lot. Like,
Kiah and I actually have a standing bet on bankers. She says bankers don't go to jail. I'm like, no, everyone has to go to jail eventually.
Like, the stats, like, name one banker who went to jail for the financial crisis. Name one banker who went to jail for TD's money laundering. Name one banker who went to jail for losing $60 million to $90 million of customer funds. Actually, you could just form another startup. That's like a seal of approval in some industries. So I couldn't help but notice that it seems like actually the only logical takeaway right now is not commit crimes, but maybe worry less about committing crimes accidentally. And I think that's a specious argument that I'm clearly making the most extreme logical argument, taking it all the way to its end. But when we talk about risk and when we talk about the parameters, I feel like the external regulatory parameters, what is acceptable behavior in this industry today, maybe not at your bank, but what is tolerated by regulators, by consumers, what's working, what's making money, what gets investments, is borderline criminal and appears to have the blessing of regulators. And the question for me is one, are we being really honest about this? Are we looking at this world and being like, crime pays? Two, what does that mean for your risk? What does that mean for the things you're worried about, especially as you go forward? I would love to be proven wrong, and I would also love to live in a world where I don't have this conclusion. So that's my premise.
So I told Dara this, is like, oh, by the way, here's the conversation tomorrow. And her immediate response, true impersonation, was, I'm like, save it for tomorrow.
It's like because now hearing it directly from Kiah as opposed to Jason's recitation of what Kiah's view.
I can answer you. Is that what I'm hearing?
Wait for it. Yeah. I am reminded of one of my favorite Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, Rachel Zoe. And to you, I would like to say, are you okay?
I don't think anyone's okay about. Yeah, that's a valid question.
I sit in a unique perspective because unlike things that Alex and Kiah don't get to report on, or that not even Jason Kula gets to uncover and investigate, the role that I sit in, I see the grand jury subpoenas when they come in. I see all of the things that are non-public, and to the extent should you be worried? Yes. Of course you should be worried, because even though we may not have shining examples of people that are rotting behind bars right now for, screwing hundreds of thousands of consumers, the truth of the matter is they could flip that switch anytime they wanted, right? The statutes are there, the laws are there, the authority of the regulators are there. And also, let's not be morally bankrupt, right? I'm not gonna advise anyone to just, throw a reg out the window or, throw ethics out the window either. But the truth of the matter is even though everyone in this room and like the private sector may not see it, there is a tremendous amount of activity going on behind the scenes that will often remain non-public, will never get reported on. Grand jury subpoenas were flying all through last year from a variety of different jurisdictions to both individuals and organizations. And while I think there has been, I would say, a diminishment of certain resources from certain law enforcement areas, they haven't been like, it hasn't been like, Control X.
Sure.
Like they're still there.
I mean, just today, the DOJ went after PayPal for the crime of DEI initiatives. So there is some law enforcement activity that does percolate to the public level. But again, I think sometimes the concern is overstated, but also right now it's kind of dealer's choice.
Yeah, and I would say, by the way, it's not just the regulators to be concerned about, because when when deregulation happens, who steps in? The plaintiff's bar. And when there's enough consumers, impacted, there may not be risks of going to jail, but there's massive financial risks. And then your insurance companies get really cranky about it, and your D&O carriers get really cranky about it. Hold on to the ethics.
You're almost talking about reputational risk. And
Doesn't exist.
Wait, what? Little bit.
Rick, speaking for all bankers, I'll tell you something where all the time. Well, one of the things we talked about at the annual member meeting was the lighter touch, and regulators who just to the last exam cycle maybe had pressed harder on things being noticeably quiet or not asking questions at all. Not just for Bank of North Dakota, but you talk to a lot of banks, you attend a lot of these. Sentiment for bankers, are they feeling like they got what they voted for with this?
I think that's a logical response, given everything. I don't think that we as an industry know how to react yet, because we're so used to this very concise area of business, and we have boards to answer to as well. And overall, the board has to take responsibility of the actions of the bank. And like Daria said, I mean, we don't get to see all the MRBAs. We don't get to see all the MRAs and everything else that has to happen at every individual bank, which makes it very difficult for us to react in those areas. And so I think right now we're seeing the pendulum swing, and it's for the good, and it opens things up, but it also, in that conservative nature of banking, puts everybody kind of back on its heels, especially our risk departments, where they're like, how do we react? How do we put these things in place that de-risk things, even though the industry has basically said, go in?
Well, so have you felt, 'cause I have not felt the risk departments have necessarily changed their stance. I'm curious, Dara, if because you're dealing with those risk departments, because this is one of Alex's predictions building on this last year, was uncertainty actually freezes responsible actors who aren't sure, like you were just describing, Rick, how this is going to move. But irresponsible actors, or those who just, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They might not be irresponsible, just inexperienced, right? They don't have the benefit of having received an MRA or having to answer to a board or different incentives. They're the ones that, move forward at full speed. Are you feeling like is the risk department still kind of stuck?
I think so. I think they're always going to be that I don't want to say adult in the room. I think the bank as overall is adult in the room, but they have to be the voice of reason, because in 3 years and 6 years, we don't know where that pendulum is going to swing again. And if we've put things in place that put that safety and soundness in jeopardy, we really have to take a hard look at ourselves, because then where are we going to be at with actions? Where are we going to be at with the customers that we have at the bank? Have we put them in a risk position? And overall, banks don't want to be in a risk position. We get paid for risk, but we know those risks, the credit risk, the equity risk, interest rate, like all those things. And so all that comes into question, especially as we talk about AI and stable coins and tokenized deposits and working down all those routes. But innovation is moving at such a rapid pace right now. It's just the learning that is consuming most banks in this industry.
Well, I also have a lot of empathy, despite my earlier assertion about crimes. The job of also working internally in any risk function at a bank got harder when your regulator is also being bananas crazy with charters, right? Like, hi, I wanted to start out our icebreaker with what was the stupidest thing you did at 25, because there is a CEO who's 25 who has conditional approval for a national bank. We have a handful of crypto banks or crypto national trust banks, which was apparently an unserved need in the industry. So it's a good thing we got 5 of them with 10 more coming. You know, Kraken, who has access to the Skinny Master account, right? Our regulators clearly interested in taking more risk in the name of innovation.
Which we don't even know what a Skinny Master is.
Right. Because they also don't feel the need to share that information with the public, whatever. But like, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do when you're suddenly like, okay, regulator, okay, like the kind of constraint, the kind of measure that I was being held up against, your risk appetite changed. You feel much more comfortable with innovation. You feel much more comfortable with potential failures, right? To take that to its logical conclusion. And so then what are you bank? What are you regulated entity? What are me, customer, who uses like the FDIC moniker and is like, oh, look, this is who the bank is regulated by, and uses that as like an external signal. What am I supposed to think?
Well, and I think we need to caveat this, because I don't know if it's all regulators. We have Washington, D.C. that's doing something. Then we have each individual region that does something. Then you have your state regulators. Then you have the Federal Reserve. Then you have the OCC. You have all these different places, and whatever they're doing in Washington, D.C. might not make it down to the regionals, and you've been still dealing with the same examiners that you have. So,
Dara?
So I want to comment on charters. And like, charters are on sale. And you've been a charter, and everybody gets a charter. It's not difficult to put together a package, an appropriately pretty bow on it package to obtain the charter. Mm-hmm. I think the real test is going to be, how do you function with said charter? Can you do, right? Like, you gave us this beautiful CMS and all of this infrastructure. You've never executed it. Right. This has never been put into play. This is a delightful work of fiction right now. So in a year, when you've had to operate under the standards that you have set forth for yourself with your pretty new shiny charter, we don't know what that's going to look like, and we certainly don't know what these very sort of bullish federal regulators who are, innovation forward, you don't know how they're going to react. So what the reality and the practical application of their pretty packaged, I'm sure very expensive from a consulting firm, a book of policies and procedures looked like. It's like when you pay a college counselor, when you're helping your kid put together their applications for college. It might get them in, but it's not going to get them their degree, right? So that's sort of my highly skeptical.
Let's come back in a year and check in on some of these charters.
Well, let's go back a year, because one of the predictions we had last year was the rise of the fintech charter, and we were partially correct in that fintechs and charters would go together like peanut butter and chocolate. But what we got wrong was, I think, none of us expected they would go actually get charters as opposed to a new class of a narrowly defined, well-defined, here's a fintech charter. Nope, we're going all in. Yeah. We're getting OCC charters in kind of unprecedented. So, Dara, I want to push on a little bit, though. I love the college counselor analogy, right? You've polished up my application. You helped me write my beautiful memoir, of how I've overcome adversity and saved the world to get in. But in a world where you're not being graded for 4 years that you've gotten into college, is the length of time, we've still got another, call it probably at least 18 months that the window is kind of open here, right? The aperture is open to wide open actions. How does that play out?
Well, who's grading you, right? There's lots of different grades you get from lots of different sources, right? There is the public grade that you get. There is the consumer grade that you get. There's the regulatory grade that you get. You, I think, referenced the regulatory grade. They may not be graded on that for a period of time. That's true. but they're getting great, like they're getting graded elsewhere. And that's when, right, we were talking yesterday about the fact that, change and regulatory change and rules and, things start creating infrastructure when like bad nonsense happens, right? So if during that ungraded time period, some bad nonsense starting to happen, maybe the grades get accelerated. Like I just don't think that there's a way to fully escape it. Unfortunately, it's usually after there's going to be like major harm done to a population of people, and that part sucks. But that has been the case for every new wave of innovation. Like that has been the case for decades. We are just in the middle of another cycle.
It kind of feels like everybody is saying, go forward, conquer, go break some things. And then we're going to figure things out once something breaks. To your point, Dara, I think the problem is that people are going to get harmed when that thing breaks. And so then how are we going to react? And that's part of the cautiousness of banks, right? We want to be the adults in the room. We don't want to go forward and break things. We want to set things up diligently and respectfully. But how do you go in this environment and do that?
Well, in the Overton,
I actually do think that there is a way, but I will say that I think I was someone who said I didn't get chicken wings last year, so I feel like
the fries are really good. I need to say for the record, the fries are.
I'm over it, but I just want to know that I was slightly offended. But during a different session, I did and do think that it was the time that if you had something that you were borderline, I don't know how my regulator is going to react to this, now is the time to try it. I do think that some larger FIs are doing that, like Amex is doing it, Citi is doing it, they are doing it. Now they can spread their risk out a little bit wider than other banks are able to. But I do think for a large majority of, not going to name any names, but people who may attend this meeting or people who have frankly engaged my services, they went home, they heard it, they were like, I'm going to snuggle with my compliance manual instead. And I'm going to wait for some clarity because the CFPB will get clearer, and it didn't get clearer. Yeah. It got quieter. That's not the same thing. And quiet isn't green space. It's just quiet. And that just creates uncertainty. So I'll say again what I said yesterday, be the standard. You guys have your internal risk profiles, be the standard. And the regulators are never going to give you a roadmap. And it's not their job to give you, a strategic roadmap. It's your job to assess your risk and profile it. You know what the laws are, you know what there are on the books, but that doesn't mean that you should be scared of deploying a new technology. It doesn't mean that you should be scared of doing this. Just do it smart and cover your tushies in your contracts and do your proper due diligence and get smart people in the room who are asking the right questions. Document it, train your boards, move forward.
Well, one of the comments you had made about this last year when you had said the window is open, if you're going to go do something, now's your chance, go shoot your shot. And had also said you have the opportunity to go produce the data to come back to, but be prepared to defend yourself, right? Yeah. Go get the grades, be prepared to defend, what you've gone and done. And that speaks to, and what I want to delve into is risk is a business decision. And one of the conversations I had with a member last night about this was talking about one of his previous bank CEOs referring to, the risk is a dial. Right? Mm-hmm. And we tend to, within regulated entities, set the dial to zero, right? Or as close to the zero as we can, as opposed to, if you think about those larger institutions, find, Jamie Dimon, the cost of doing business, if it's a potential huge upside, is, unlimited, fine of a couple $1 million I can absorb.
That's just the cost of doing business.
It's the cost of doing business, right? Where we have all the upside benefit. But the question becomes, how do we change culturally where, let's face it, a lot of the startups where it's growth at all costs, they have to raise the next round and there's so much noise that they have to break through. They've got to turn the gain all the way up, right? This one goes to 11. And you have the bigger banks that can absorb more, or the larger players, the Stripes, the PayPals of the world, right? Like they're picking maybe call it a 3 to 5. Right? Like what's acceptable, right? They also don't want the reputational risk. But a lot of community FIs, we dial it down to 0. Mm-hmm. How do we begin to think about risk as a business decision?
I think what some of these banks have done that have done things successfully in this space is they've started with kind of their risk department and said, how do we build this to be compliant, knowing that we're going to take on some risk? I mean, I think it's some of the ones that are in the embedded space, and they have done that really well, because those aren't the consent orders that you're hearing about or the negative press. And those are the ones that are going along. There are banks in every single one of those niche areas that have done it well, and it's because they've gotten their risk appetite dialed in. They got the risk department dialed in order to go forward. And it's almost like you have to work backwards in some of these cases. Now, I wouldn't say that's 100% of the time, but they set the tone at the top and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. Guys, we need to figure out a way.
I think if we've had conversations around culture, around mindsets, around environments, and Jason, I think your observation about where most community banks' actual risk intolerance is close to zero, while and that comforts them and that makes them feel safe, and that is part of their identity. And it almost feels like, especially post-financial crisis, and the coming out of where banks were reputationally with consumers and the licking their wounds for so many years, that there was an internalization, and the fear now is reflexive. And so I think sometimes when we think about innovation can be hard, because in your head, innovation is very, very scary. And I think that mindset would serve you well under certain administrations, under certain federal banking agencies. That is a shared philosophy. But what I feel like I see here is like a delta between the non-banks, but still financial institution companies. Like the Overton window full of stupid stuff this market will tolerate when it comes to people's money is shifted. Like why is Polymark and Kalshi having such success with their regulator, right? Who is now going after states' rights for right. And that's again, outside of regulated chartered financial institutions. But to say you don't necessarily have to make that your risk appetite, but to understand this is maybe something that will need to change internally. And if my regulator isn't setting my risk appetite, if they don't necessarily align, okay, then I've got some flexibility. And what kind of risk don't I want to take? But when we think about AI, when we think about technology, when we think about innovation, where will I feel comfortable taking risk? How would I manage that risk? Acting Comptroller Mike Sue used to say, the fastest cars have the best brakes. So both and, right? And I think that's on the less do crimes, but that kind of flexibility, right?
Do less crimes. That's the hot.
Don't do crimes.
Do less crimes.
Don't be so scared about it.
But I think that the challenge that we get, especially in the community banking space, is how much will this actually affect me? And
in
so,
what way?
Well, all these things that we're talking about with risk appetite and things, is that actually taking market share away from me? Is it actually impacting what I do at a local level or in my customer base?
I sometimes ask myself in my reporting, if nothing changes today, which to be clear, not making a choice is a choice. Mm-hmm. Choosing to do nothing is a choice. If nothing changes, then in 5 years, what happens? I've been interested in demographic research. The United States will have no new people net between 2030 or 2031 and 2036. If nothing changes in 10 years, what happens to your bank? If you take no technology risk, no credit risk, no growth risk, no liquidity risk.
Well, since we had talked about this yesterday and have for a while, since so many banks, especially community banks, have so much of an older population, some of the stats brought up banks that had more 90-year-olds than 19-year-olds, right? And things like this. Well, they are going to, using the polite word, attrite, also known as delive, that begins to go. And I think you asked the right question about what changes. I think one of the challenges that we as an industry need to get better at, not just community banks, but broadly, and especially maybe some of the fintechs, anyone who's got the dial either all the way down or all the way up, is better articulating and quantifying what is acceptable risk and making that more transparent.
I have to say something. I have to. I feel like right now the conversation is like a smidge esoterical. I live in the practical, right? So as a practical matter, when I'm working with the client about should we or shouldn't we, and how do we practically manage this risk, and we want to make the decision to keep the dial to zero or as close to zero as possible, I say there are ways to mitigate that risk while still keeping that dial relatively low. It's never zero. Even when you set it to zero, it's not zero. But one practical takeaway, I think that is a good, and I've had success with some of my clients before, is if you want to do something new, offer a new product, a new service, a new technology, you know who's helping you de-risk everything? Your insurer. Go have a conversation with your insurer, amend your decks, literally quantify it. You can buy that protection. There is an ability to do that. And if the risk that we're worried about is financial, that is a way to de-risk the financial because you've been open, you've been transparent, your deck is going to cover everything, your E&O policy and D&O policy will be up to date, and that boards can get their brains around. Like that's a very practical, sticky way for boards to get their brains around. Okay, because your treasurer is always worried about the financial risk and what happens, because I feel like reputational risk is. I know you guys care very, very much about it, but the regulators don't.
Yeah.
Like the regulators don't anymore because, anyone that touches fintech has a bad reputation or you get a charter, right? Like, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, I think reputation risk can become, the wrong windmill to chase.
Yeah.
Because, we all feel differently about what's acceptable. But let's start with financial risk. And so there's a CEO in the room in his prior bank, and I was privy to helping facilitate executive team in their riskiest line of business. The team came forward and said, for this factoring business, our losses were, round it to zero, right? That's what it was. And the CEO, almost lost his mind. He's like, what did we model our risk to be, right? Given the expected.
Yeah, what was our
expected loss rate? And it was something around 10%. So because it's a very profitable line of business. It's I'm going to walk into a board meeting tomorrow to talk about us meeting our growth goals. And here's what we define as acceptable risk, right? We've quantified it. We published it. And you're very proud of the fact we didn't even come close to it. He's I'm not asking you to go do willy-nilly crazy things, but we're still so far from the margin at this point, right? What are we even doing here? And I think if we can then say, okay, the loss, on a lending world, we can quantify the financial. We can look at some of these other things. And Rick, I'm curious, because you guys are now with the Rough Rider coin, and beginning to think about other modes and means of doing things. Are you quantifying the risks?
Yeah, I mean, we do it as best we can. Obviously, these are novel products. And what we've said is we really have to do risk assessments constantly and make sure that we're keeping up on the risks that are associated with it as we continue to move down the line. Because it's not just for us. It's also for the financial institutions of North Dakota. So we bear that risk and we accept that risk, and we have to make sure that we're setting it up for success for all of them too. But we have to quantify it. Everything has to be quantifiable to a certain extent. Even if it's a quantitative versus qualitative, we have to quantify it so that the board can see it, so that our financial institutions see it. Now, every single one isn't going to have a number associated to it, but you can mark it high, medium, low, just the way that you would in any other type of risk situation. And you should be doing that in every single business line that you get into. And I'm sure you agree as we work through this. But the problem that we see is not everybody is thinking about it like that. And so if you don't do it, that's when you get into trouble. And that's where you're not taking into those risk considerations. But the board ultimately has to approve that and say, are we okay with the risks that we are getting into, knowing that this is what the ultimate outcome is going to be? Or in these novel products, here's what the cost of not getting into it will be. And it's not just us, it's the whole financial ecosystem.
Well, and it kind of goes back to some of how I interpret the commentary, the discourse, is that it sounds like bankers take risks. They take, these quantifiable financial risks. And when it comes to some of these innovation risks, if we're going to use this dial analogy, the dial on innovation, the dial on risk actually turned up externally. And so, it's like the heat in your house is rising. So it's like, how would you respond? Some people would, I don't know, turn on the air, make it go lower. Some people are like, okay, well, it's 90 outside. Maybe it can be 70 in here. But you have had to dial your innovation dial. And hopefully there wasn't a 1-for-1 dial that changed on the risk. But the question was also what dial do we take if we hit stasis and nothing changes? That's cost too. And then having quantified these things, how do we build the skill set to think about these things? And that's something I think the traditional financial institutions industry really struggles with in a way that the fintech industry doesn't struggle with. They have this shared mindset around the fungibility, the flexibility, the less reflexive fear of a downside, it's that debt equity mindset, I guess, that I've heard so much about, but that in banking, we don't even want to develop this muscle. So we can't have the thoughts to think about it. And I don't want to say all banks, but I feel like the broad continuum of banks, you can see a lot of this. And I think that we would then see, again, in 5 years, if nothing changes, what can we expect to see from our chartered financial institution industry of the legacy charters? And then potentially, again, come back in a year, the success, potentially, of the novel charters. No? Yes?
I don't know that that's a fair comparison. And I say that representing both fintechs and banks, because that mindset, that different thinking is driven by a variety of different things, primarily how they're capitalized.
Sure.
Which are, Jason knows some of the stories that I can't share fully publicly, but, and I am absolutely not painting all founders with a broad brush, because that would be completely unfair and inaccurate. However, there are a segment of founders within fintech who are raising tons and tons and tons of money and then act wildly irresponsible with that money because it isn't theirs. They should feel like it's theirs. They should have that founder mentality, but they behave. Jason knows I speak the truth. They act like it. They act like it doesn't.
Are they going to jail when this happens? I just really quickly.
I was gonna go.
So sorry. Does anything bad happen to them when this happens? No.
When my clients let me tip law enforcement, it sure does. Right. So, but
is it a Venn diagram? Is this Venn diagram a circle of to me they're these are in my purely logical world. This is if there's no real consequences or only one in 10.
There are some real consequences. And if anyone had the appetite to Google my name and some cases in the Chancery Court of Delaware, you might see some of the real life consequences that have existed for some of these founders in the past. But the truth of the matter is, as bankers, you're not acting like that, because that money belongs to you and it belongs to your customers. So I think the way an organization is capitalized absolutely influences their thinking, and you are never going to be able to think like someone who doesn't give a flying what about their source of funds.
Part of that in the capitalization, though, what is the existential risk? And so for a lot of these startups, whether it's an early stage startup or a company that's raised a ton of money, it is of them not being able to raise more money until they have a real business, right? And so they don't solve for what is the risk to my customer, what is the risk to my shareholder, what is my risk to my reputation. It is the risk of going out of business or not getting into a sustainable business. So they go into moonshot mode.
Or just making it look pretty for their B round.
Yes, to the ability to raise the next round.
Right. Different goals.
Different goals, but that's also different when the risk of your regulator who is visiting you regularly, right, and asking questions, even if they're not giving stern reprimands and memorializing.
They give you some feedback, and you get the option of deciding whether you take it or not, right?
Right, but that's real. We talked about that yesterday. Is you can.
It doesn't sound bad to me. That's.
No, it sounds like I liken some of this to parenting. Yeah. My daughters had a big blow up fueled by too much sugar and a birthday party. And the 9-year-old was freaked out. And I'm like, what's wrong, H? She goes, you're being very quiet. Right? And she's like, I kind of prefer if you got upset and told us what was going wrong. I'm like, a little too mad for that right now. But that's
Daddy needs a minute.
I'm like, but that's where we are, right? Is giving recommendations right now and some feedback to course correct before it goes off the rails. Seems like it's better for everyone. And I think, this has been my rant for a while, but I'll say it again. My podcast gets to say it if I want to, is we don't have enough accountability for boards and investors in some of the places where people are getting hurt.
Yeah, we don't have, I would argue we don't have, I mean, Dara feels differently, but as a journalist, as someone who started covering the financial institutions industry after the great financial crisis, we have shockingly little accountability. And I would like to live in a world of greater accountability, and we don't. And so that is kind of like the cynicism that drives my insane, do a little bit more crimes, it's okay. Is it a crime if there's no charges? Mentality. And then I also covering banks, and then I see what happens in fintech, and it's bad and stupid out there. And I don't know what we're supposed to do. I don't know how you're supposed to meaningfully resist. I don't know where you're supposed to kind of strike the line going forward. And then it kind of gets a little tired to hear community banks, again, no one that you know, Jason, but some banks act like I can't turn on Microsoft Copilot. The risk might be too great. And you're like, no, what are you talking about?
No, you'd be shocked the number of banks. Right?
But I would say that some of these community banks, some of them don't even have online account opening. And so now we're jumping into AI and stablecoin, and you're going from 1970s banking or to 2030 banking, and it becomes a very difficult thing to wrap your head around. I would also say that we probably don't have a lot of great succession planning in some communities.
Big risk, that's a risk.
Yeah, so I mean, we could go into a whole other host of risks that we have, but they also don't know that they're going to be around to see this next evolution of what we're talking about.
Get these boomers out of those jobs, you know what I mean? We got to pass down.
I don't want to go that far.
I think where we're finding the middle ground here, though, is the big risk is back to the dial, is in the extremes of if you turn it to zero, it becomes the existential risk. If you turn it all the way up, it becomes the risk. And for the majority of FIs, how do we find the acceptable in the middle?
I think I agree with you. And I also think, on a day-to-day basis, yes, that's the real question, but also to understand the environment that you operate in. I think my concern is there's less alignment. There's less shared philosophy around risk with your regulators or the federal banking regulators, let me put it that way, especially the banking agency heads, that their actions have allowed more risk into the financial institutions space. Wasn't it great that when Voyager failed and Three Arrows failed, no one had to worry about it because only Metropolitan Bank in New York had to deal with it? Wasn't it great that bankruptcy was handled well and I think took 2 months, but was apparently an ideal bankruptcy? Wasn't it great to not think about that? Too bad, right? Crypto's here. Some people want to do it. There will be national trust banks that are doing it, which are using non-insured depository institution. Oh, why do I know about two crypto trust banks that don't have a bank charter or a bank with it that have gone into bankruptcy and have had issues with customer funds? Why do I live in this world? Who asked for this, right? It's getting dumb and bad out there. Good luck, guys.
I do believe in the next few years we are going to see, I don't know if it's going to be next year when you're doing this again, but I do believe that banks will find a way to adapt in some of these and dial that risk and reward meter to the right for their individuals. So we're going to see more AI adoption. We're going to see some of these other concepts actually going into fruition. to capture some of the stuff that we've already talked about with risk.
Well, I think that's a great way to start to bring this to a close, is both of the last 3 days that this group of banks have spent together, because I'd say the bias towards action in the room, if we look at the story arc of the conversations of, 3 years ago, AI is a concept that we were wrestling with, to, last year, AI is things we're actively working on, to the conversations over the last 3 days here of like, AI is how do we think these market forces are fundamentally reshaping the business and our strategies and the things we need to do. I think the banks that will not just survive but thrive are going to be doing those things. The question I pose to each of you as we close is, how would you think about, we have an opportunity, well, Dara's window of opportunity is open. What do you do with that, right? Because it's only open for a period. What do you do both to take advantage of it and to protect yourself? Dara, I'm going to start with you.
So last year, when everyone went home and snuggled their compliance annuals and then we're just like waiting for guidance, that was the best time. But like right now is the second best time. I do still think that the window is open. I do think, however, that it was not going to stay open forever. I think the Basel III endgame, like even watered down, capital treatment is going to be tightened on certain partnership structures. State AGs who sat on their hands are not going to sit on their hands anymore. New York DFS basically became its own like independent federal regulator this year in terms of its enforcement posture. I think Illinois and California are not far behind and not waiting. So
California basically recreated the CFPB today.
Yeah.
Oprah's hiring.
Yeah. I mean, like, yay for my fiscal year, but not for anybody else's. So I think that the prisoner's dilemma that we sort of started with, here's like my slight Dara addendum. The prisoners who want to move fast and smart, frankly, have already cut their deals. And everyone else, we may or may not be like sitting in the interrogation room, like waiting for your lawyer to come, but like find your smart lawyer, put together defensible postures on the things that are most important to you, go talk to your insurance companies and make the next 12 months really, really productive. And don't wait for midterms. Don't wait to see what happens at midterms, because then you're just gonna be waiting forever and ever and ever.
If you're not going to take my advice to do a little bit of crime, I will say that I'll second Dara's point, but I also, think from the kind of both cultural and operational perspective. There's a lot of smart bankers out there, but we need a lot of mature bankers. We need people who aren't reflexively scared of risk and can really like look at it, calculate it, are willing to at least be curious about it. And that I would argue going forward, you're going to want to play really good offense and defense. You are going to want to capitalize on your competitors' mistakes. And you are going to want to be in a position where you can make decisive moves that align with your strategy, which you have clearly articulated and then properly incentivized everyone in your bank to do, and win every single day. And the other thing too, and I challenge myself to do this, you're gonna have to get really good at ignoring stuff. And there's just, again, it's stupid and dumb out there, or it's like bad and dumb. And so you're gonna really wanna, if something's not how you're gonna win, and if it's not part of the risks that you're going to need to control, you can just ignore it. And so I think that, and that, which is kind of to your point about midterms, right? Like, work as if Republicans win, work as if Democrats win, right? So I think but that kind of that's just being a good operator on a day-to-day basis and having like a North Star and going towards there. You can't control which way the wind blows. You can't control the way that the tides are moving or that, the waves are going, but you know where you're going, right? And that's what you have to do there.
Great answers. Oh, I heard something last month that really stuck with me. And I think one thing that we've talked about too, I think when we were talking about this, was bankers don't do a good job of celebrating their wins either.
Yeah.
And so we've sat here, and you just talked about it. 3 years ago, we were saying AI might be here to stick. 2 years ago, we were saying, oh yeah, it's catching on. Last year, we're saying, oh yeah, we got to do something here. think of all the terminologies that we've learned in the last few years, and not just AI, stable coins, tokenized deposit, blockchain, permission, permissionless, all of these different things. One thing that stuck with me from a month ago was 2026 is the year to learn. 2027 is the year to build. 2028, we figure out if it all is going to work. Because I think it's going to take time for everything to shake out, regardless of the political factions or whatever goes in, regulation, all of those things. But it really stuck with me because I think our financial institutions are doing a great job of learning, even though they probably feel like they're behind the curve. They're actually learning a ton more than what they actually think that they're learning, and the things that are sticking and how they're going to figure out use cases. And in the next year, I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more innovation in these financial institutions, even if it is on the learning side, and then implementing some sort of AI, whether it be knowledge bases or along those lines, something that's getting them around that so that they can even further educate their bases. And I think we're going to see that shake out. And that's the inspiring thing, or the opportunities at it. And I know we talk about threats so much, but the opportunities are so vast in this space if we can just latch onto that.
Well, the one thing I'll disagree with is the timetable you gave, is I think
I was
the
going to say, I
time
want to
that
squish it.
I think it is too. I think it's compressing, but
it's compressing.
There's a nice little, yeah.
Well, and I'll close with a newer member, first time at our annual member meeting, made the comment that they came into this week thinking that they were far ahead because they were looking at the wrong peer group, and they said they're leaving feeling like they're behind. And you said, not just, I think they were in that absorb and educate mode like you had described, Rip, and they realized others are already taking action. And what you learn by doing, just like your Rough Rider coin, and we've talked about, like, only in doing do you actually get a lot of this knowledge. And I'd say we'll leave it with that is, only when you turn up the knob a little bit, right, in the smaller increments,
You gotta touch the knob, yeah.
Yes, let's grab the knob, and you don't have to go to 11, but you got to begin to turn it to learn what it can do. So with that, thank you guys for joining us. Thank you everyone for making this a fantastic 3 days together, and safe flights home.
Data Stories recording, and I didn't want to give them the headache, but I have sat in this room for 3 years, and I just want to commend this group for the level of conversations, the sophistication, the maturity, the honesty and vulnerability. You are having conversations today that you were not capable of having 3 years ago. And so you didn't have the vocabulary, you didn't have the trust, you didn't have the mindset. And so yes, this is a win. Being here is a win. Conversing is a win. And what you do with that information, hopefully also will be, again, aligned with your strategy and authentic to your bank and identity, but is also a win. And so nice job, everyone.